This is going to be a quick study guide and reviewing those skills that you need in order to be successful with the test, with the upcoming test. So let's take a look. Okay, so on your paper, go ahead and pause this video, write down what you see, and then we will have, we'll talk our way through the procedure. Okay, so go ahead and pause and then continue when you're ready. Okay. So the first thing that we did was we took out the 1, okay? That's the identity property. So on your paper, so that you have this to study, write down identity, take out the 1. Okay, so the next step, we just basically turned all of our whole numbers into improper fractions, so that way when we went to the multiplicative inverse, we would know to flip the fraction. So let's just rewrite here. Multiplicative inverse was next. Now, I want you to write this down on your paper. You're going to write down step 1, step 2. The first step is to change your division to multiplication. Okay, and then your step 2 is to make sure that you actually take the reciprocal of the next number, okay, or invert the next number. So make sure, because you have multiplicative, inverse, you're actually doing those 2 steps, okay, for the 2-word vocabulary word. So I usually tell students, hey, how many words actually make up multiplicative inverse? So like 2. Okay, well then do the 2 steps. First, change it from division to multiplication, and then invert the next number, which is usually a fraction. All right, the next one we performed commutative property. So write down commutative on your sheet. And that's when we just reordered the numbers to our liking, okay? So most people like to put the positives first, the negatives last, okay? And that's obviously what I did here. Finally, we have associative, okay? And that is where we keep the order that we just, did for commutative, but instead we use grouping, and we show the grouping with parentheses. So basically, that's whatever's inside those parentheses is what we want to solve first. So in this case, I wanted to solve the 1/6 times the 4/1 first, and then after I figure out that answer, multiply that to -3/1. If you did your math correctly, we get -2. Let's move on. Okay, pause your screen, write all this down, and then resume play when you're ready to write. Okay, the first step. First off, you cannot do identity here, okay, because this is a -1. The -1 will change our answer, so we cannot perform identity. So I want you to write on your paper, cannot perform identity. With the -1. So instead, what I did is I made sure that the whole entire expression is in fraction format. So let's just put down, make sure expression, the entire problem, okay? Make sure expression is written as fractions. So that means all your whole numbers became fractions and proper fractions. Now, when we did that, I still kept the division, 1/3 divided by -8/1, okay? So as I rewrote the expression, I kept the division in there. I did not change it to multiplication until I was ready for the multiplicative inverse part. Now, I want you to rewrite this, even though we just on the previous question wrote it there, but please Write down step 1, step 2, because the more you write it down, the more you will remember. Step 1 is changing division to multiplication. And then step 2 of that, the inverse part, is invert the next number. Okay, so when we did that, we get 1/3 times 1 over negative 8 times negative 1 over 1 times 4 over 1. Okay? Right here, this is the commutative property where we just reordered. And then finally, we grouped with associative property, because whatever's inside those parentheses is what we're going to multiply first. And then when we solve this equation, or when we solve this expression, we get 1/6 at the end. Okay, so one thing I want to point out, people have been making this mistake. People right here, this right there, this is multiplication. What I've seen on people's quizzes is they think that it's this. So they're actually doing the inverse of -1 when they don't need to do the inverse of -1 because it's multiplication. Okay, so let's make sure that we understand that up there, when there's no operation, but there are parentheses, that means to multiply. All right, let's move on. Last problem. Last problem, I put in a decimal, okay? So the first thing that I want to do is I want to get rid of that 1 because it's the easiest property to ever do, the identity property. Okay? Now, where did that 7/5 come from? Well, that is 1.4, okay, converted into a fraction, and then that fraction became improper. So this is what I did in order to get 7.7 over 5. Now, this is what you're going to have to do when you have your test or any other type of problem in the future. So notice how I kept it as a division problem and I rewrote everything. Okay, this is the rewrite section. I rewrote everything as a fraction. So over here in the corner, 1.4. Now, we don't normally say, as mathematicians, we don't say 1.4. We say 1 4/10. Okay? So the way we say it appropriately with their place value is how we write it. Now, go ahead and change 1 4/10. We're going to change that to 10 times 1 is 10 plus 4 is 14. Now, you can use 14 over 10 in your expression, but I wanted to work with smaller numbers, so I decided to simplify that down by 2 and get 7 over 5. So that's why you see 7 over 5 in the expression instead of 1.4. All right, once I rewrote everything, made everything the same format, okay, all fractions. Now I'm able to apply the multiplicative inverse. Now, again, on your paper, you are going to write down both steps. Like I said, writing it down makes you remember better. So step 1, change division to multiplication. And step 2, flip it or invert the next number. Okay, and then finally we can do those properties that we are good at. I'm not saying that you're not good at anything else, but just saying. Commutative property is where we reorder, okay, to our liking. The associative property, we're going to show those groups that we want to multiply first. Okay, and then once you perform, so you multiply what's inside the parentheses, or you bring that answer down, then you multiply that to the fraction that's left over, you will eventually get 2 over 7. Okay, so study this, look it over. Once you've written everything down, you need to study it for the test, and if you have any questions, you need to come and see me so I can help you get it right, okay? Good luck.